My stepdaughter looked me dead in the eye, adjusted her designer watch, and told me that the greatest gift I could give her for her wedding was my absence. She did not raise her voice. She did not even look angry. She said it with the casual indifference of someone ordering a salad. According to Chloe, I was not her real father. I was just Clifton, the corporate guy who wrote the checks. My wife of 15 years, Eleanor, sat right next to her at the table, staring down at her glass of Chardonnay. She did not say a word to defend me. She did not offer a single protest. So, I did exactly what they wanted. I agreed to disappear. But before I walked away, I made sure to reclaim every single piece of my life that they had taken for granted. Within 72 hours, I sold the Greenwich mansion they slept in, canceled every single wedding vendor, and left nothing but a cheap metal folding chair and a receipt showing a balance of $0 on the empty kitchen counter. They wanted me out of their picture-perfect life, so I took the house, the money, and the future right out from under them. Before I explain how I executed the perfect financial audit of my own family, let me introduce myself. My name is Clifton Barlow. I am 65 years old. For 4 decades, I worked as a chief financial officer for a Fortune 500 company, managing billions of dollars in assets. Before that, I was a logistics officer in the United States Marine Corps. I know how to calculate risk, I know how to spot a bad investment, and I know how to deploy resources under pressure. What I failed to realize was that the worst investment of my life was sleeping in the master bedroom of my own home, while I spent my weekends cataloging receipts in the study. For 15 years, I had been the silent engine keeping a luxury lifestyle afloat for a wife and a stepdaughter who secretly despised my existence. The tipping point happened on a Friday night at Le Bernardin, a 3-Michelin-star seafood restaurant in Manhattan. The table was covered in crisp white linen, the lighting was low, and the room smelled of old money. I was sitting across from Eleanor, who was 58, and Chloe, who was 26. Chloe was a self-styled social media influencer. Her entire life was a carefully curated facade of luxury, funded entirely by my bank account. She spent her days at spas, country clubs, and boutiques, posting photos of a life she had never earned. Her fiancé, Logan, was a 27-year-old who had not held a job for more than 6 months at a time, yet walked around with the arrogance of a venture capitalist. As we waited for the main course, Chloe slid a heavy, cream-colored envelope across the table toward me. It was the official wedding invitation. The paper was hand-pressed cotton with gold leaf lettering. I knew the price of those invitations because the invoice for $5.00 had gone straight to my office the week before. I opened it, expecting to see my name listed as the host. Traditionally, the person paying for the entire event is listed at the top. I scanned the elegant script. It read, "Mr. and Mrs. Richard Vance request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Chloe." I froze. My name was nowhere on the paper. Richard Vance was Chloe's biological father. He was a smooth-talking mechanic who had not paid a single dollar in child support since 2004. He was the man who showed up once every 2 years with a hangover and a cheap gift, only to disappear when the rent was due. I had paid for Chloe's private school, her braces, her dermatologists, and her 4-year degree at NYU, yet the deadbeat dad was listed as the host. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice low and controlled, "I think there is a mistake on the printing. My name is missing." Chloe did not look up from her phone. She was busy taking a photo of her appetizer. "It is not a mistake, Clifton," she said, her voice flat. "We talked about it. Richard is walking me down the aisle, so it only makes sense that his name is on the invite." I felt a cold pressure tightening in my chest. "Richard is not paying for this wedding, Chloe." "I am. I have already wired $80. Zero in non-refundable deposits to the venue, the caterer, and the florist. Richard has not contributed a single cent." Chloe sighed, rolling her eyes. "Please do not make this about money, Clifton. You always do that. This is about aesthetics. Richard has that rugged, artistic look that fits the vintage vineyard theme we are going for. You have to admit, you are very corporate. You look stiff in photos. We want these pictures to be perfect. This is my special day." I looked at Eleanor, waiting for her to intervene. Surely, after 15 years of marriage, she would speak up. She knew the sacrifices I had made. I had cleared $120,000 of her personal debt when we married. I had postponed my retirement by 5 years just to fund Chloe's lifestyle and keep our Greenwich estate running. Eleanor took a slow sip of her wine, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and avoided my gaze. "Honey," Eleanor said softly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Let it go. It is Chloe's day. We just want her to be happy. Richard is family, and you know how sensitive he is about his financial status. We do not want him to feel excluded." Excluded. The word felt like a physical blow. The man who had abandoned them was family. The man who paid the mortgage and funded their luxury was an embarrassment, an accessory that did not match the color palette of the wedding photos. I looked down at the leather folder containing the dinner bill. It was $800 for a meal where I was told I was too corporate to be recognized as a father. If I had been a younger man, I might have yelled. I might have thrown the invitation in their faces. But decades in corporate boardrooms had taught me that anger is a waste of energy. When you display emotion, you lose leverage. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my heavy metal American Express card, and placed it on the bill. "I understand," I said, forcing a calm smile. "I want the photos to be perfect, too." Chloe clapped her hands, her eyes lighting up. "Thank you, Clifton. I knew you would understand. Oh, and since you are being so supportive, Logan and I were thinking about upgrading the champagne toast to Dom Perignon. It is only an extra $4,000. "Order whatever you want," I replied. The ride back to Connecticut in my Mercedes was completely silent. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat scrolling through her iPad, while Chloe texted Logan in the back. As I drove, my mind was not on the wedding budget. I was running the numbers of my life. I was calculating the exact moment I had allowed myself to become a utility company rather than a husband and father. The contract was clear. They viewed me as a resource. And as a CFO, I knew exactly what to do when a resource became a liability. You write it off. We pulled into the driveway of our colonial estate. The house was massive, surrounded by white pillars and manicured lawns that cost $2.00 a month to maintain. As I carried their shopping bags into the kitchen, I told Eleanor I had some urgent financial paperwork to finish in my study. I walked down the hall, entered my office, and shut the door. I sat in the darkness for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of my wife laughing in the kitchen. She was on the phone. "He actually said yes to the suit," Eleanor was saying, her high-pitched laugh echoing slightly through the wall. "I thought he would make a scene, but he just rolled over. He is so desperate to keep the peace. Honestly, he is useful. We just need to keep him happy until the honeymoon in the Maldives is paid for. That is another $20,000. Once the wedding is over, I think I can convince him to sell this place and downsize to a small condo so we can cash out the equity. Richard needs a new truck anyway." My blood ran cold. They were not just planning to exclude me from the wedding. They were planning to liquidate my assets, dump me in a retirement condo, and hand the remains of my hard work to the deadbeat biological father. I stood up, walked to the painting behind my desk, and swung it open to reveal the safe. I spun the dial. I pulled out a blue leather folder containing my premarital asset records and estate planning documents. I turned on my desk lamp and opened the folder. The deed to the Greenwich estate was in my name alone. Eleanor's name was never added because of her severe credit issues from her past gambling debts. 5 years ago, I had bailed her out of a $150,000 debt to Atlantic City lenders, but only after she signed an ironclad post-nuptial agreement waiving all claims to this house and my retirement accounts. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. "Drake," a raspy voice answered. It was Lawrence Drake, a ruthless corporate attorney who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection. "Lawrence," I said, "I need to liquidate the Greenwich estate. I need a cash buyer, and I need the transaction closed in 7 days." There was a brief pause. "Patricia is not going to like that, Clifton. She won't know," I said, "not until the locks are changed. And Lawrence, I need you to prepare to cancel some accounts. All of them. Start talking," Drake said, the sound of a pen scratching paper filling the line. "I'm listening." For the next hour, Lawrence Drake and I laid out the blueprint for what I called the ultimate financial audit. I did not raise my voice, and I did not let my emotions dictate my instructions. I was a Marine and a corporate executive. I dealt in logistics and facts. I instructed Lawrence to trigger the penalty clauses in the few utility and maintenance contracts that were under my name. More importantly, I authorized him to contact a private equity group that specialized in distressed cash purchases. I was willing to sell the Greenwich estate for 20% below market value if a buyer could close the deal in 7 days and allow me a 7-day leaseback period. I did not care about the loss in equity. To me, it was the price of an eviction notice that would hit them with the force of a freight train. When I hung up the phone, the Greenwich house was dead quiet. I walked to the window and looked out at the heated swimming pool, its blue water glowing under the security lights. I remembered teaching Chloe how to swim in that pool when she was 10. I remembered the birthdays, the graduation parties, and the holidays where I was the one who grilled the steaks and cleaned up the kitchen while everyone else opened gifts. I had been a good provider, a generous stepfather, and a loyal husband. But tonight, that version of me was dead. Clifton the patriarch was gone. Clifton the auditor was back in charge. The key to my plan lay in the blue folder on my desk, the post-nuptial agreement. 5 years ago, Eleanor had developed a severe gambling problem. It started with local charity poker games, escalated to slot machines, and ended with her borrowing a $150,000 from high-interest lenders in Atlantic City to cover her losses. I only found out when 2 men in dark suits showed up at my corporate office, politely explaining that my wife had signed over her jewelry and was now defaulting on a massive debt. Eleanor had been hysterical, weeping on her knees in my study, promising she would enter therapy and never touch a card again. I paid her debt, I made the men in the suits go away, and I saved her from public humiliation. But I did not do it for free. As a CFO, I never bail out an insolvent entity without securing collateral. I had Lawrence Drake draft an ironclad post-nuptial agreement. In exchange for the $150,000 cash injection to clear her debt, Eleanor signed a contract waiving all future rights to my premarital assets, which included the Greenwich house and my primary retirement portfolios. She was so desperate to avoid the consequences of her gambling that she signed it without reading the fine print. She believed I was too soft, too in love, and too predictable to ever enforce it. She was wrong. On Saturday morning, the sun streamed into the breakfast nook with a bright, cheerful energy that felt completely out of place. Chloe was already sitting at the marble kitchen island, surrounded by thick bridal magazines, aggressively circling floral arrangements with a red marker. Eleanor was at the counter, her high-speed blender whirring as she prepared a green smoothie. "Morning, Clifton," Eleanor called out over the noise of the blender. She poured the thick green liquid into a glass and set it in front of me. "Drink up. You look exhausted. We have a massive day ahead. The florist appointment is at 10, and then we need to meet the tailor for Richard's fitting." I looked at the green sludge. I took a slow sip, keeping my face completely expressionless. "Actually," I said, setting the glass down, "I was thinking we should expand the floral budget. Chloe, those roses you were looking at last week seemed a bit modest." Chloe's head snapped up. Her eyes, normally dull with entitlement, flashed with sudden interest. "Really? But you said $8,000 was the absolute limit for flowers." I smiled, a tight, controlled expression that they mistook for generosity. "I was thinking about what you said last night, Chloe, about the aesthetics. If Richard is walking you down the aisle, the path needs to look royal. We want the photos to look like a high-fashion spread. What about those imported white orchids from Thailand, the ones you said were out of our price range?" Chloe let out a high-pitched squeal. "Oh my God, Clifton! Those are 3 times the price of the roses. Are you serious?" "You only get married once," I said, spreading butter on my toast. "Let us make it a masterpiece. Call the florist. Tell her we are upgrading to the premium orchid package." Eleanor walked over, beaming, and pressed a brief, cold kiss to the top of my head. "See? I told you he just needed a good night's sleep to see sense." "Thank you, honey. You are being so supportive." "Of course," I replied. "Call the florist and tell her to prepare the paperwork. Put it under my tab." As Chloe frantically typed a text to her fiancé, Logan, to brag about the upgrade, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Lawrence Drake. "Distressed asset buyer confirmed. Cash contract ready for signature. Closing set for Monday morning." You have 48 hours to secure your personal belongings. I felt a sharp hit of adrenaline, but my hand remained steady as I picked up my coffee cup. The countdown had officially begun. At 10 a.m., we arrived at the luxury floral studio in downtown Greenwich. The shop was filled with the heavy, sweet scent of lilies and eucalyptus. The lead designer, Gillian, welcomed us into a private consultation room with glasses of sparkling water. She had dollar signs in her eyes the moment she saw the brand of my watch. Chloe immediately pointed to the portfolio of imported white Phalaenopsis orchids. "We want to upgrade to this," she said proudly. "The full archway, the table runners, and the flower wall for the guest photos." Gillian smiled warmly, her pen flying across her notepad. "An excellent choice, Chloe. That will create an unforgettable visual." The total for the upgrade, including the rush delivery and installation fees, comes to $28,000. We will need a $5 Zuzan deposit today to secure the shipment from our supplier. I patted my jacket pockets, my face falling into a look of mild embarrassment. "Oh, how frustrating," I muttered. "I left my wallet in my other suit jacket. Logan, you have your credit card with you, don't you?" Logan, who had tagged along hoping for a free lunch, looked up from his phone, startled. Yeah, I have the emergency card my parents co-signed for." "Perfect," I said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Put the deposit on your card today to lock in the shipment. I will write you a check for the full $5,000 on Monday morning when the financial markets open. Plus, you will get the travel points for the transaction. It is a win-win." Logan hesitated, looking at Chloe, who was nodding aggressively. The promise of easy reimbursement and the desire to look like a big spender in front of his future bride took over. He pulled out the heavy gold card his parents had secured for him and handed it to Gillian. The machine beeped. Approved. I watched the slip of paper print out. The contract for the upgraded floral services was officially in Logan's name, and the financial liability belonged entirely to him and his co-signing parents. The trap was set, and they were walking into it with smiles on their faces. From the florist, we drove to the catering consultation at a private country club, where Chloe's wedding reception was scheduled to be held. Richard Vance, Chloe's biological father, was already sitting at the table when we arrived. He was wearing a faded polo shirt that was too tight around his beer gut, looking entirely out of place in the elegant dining room. Despite his shabby appearance, he sat at the head of the table with the posture of a man who owned the club. He had already ordered a scotch on my tab and was halfway through it. "The chicken is dry," Richard announced, tossing his fork onto the plate as the catering manager finished presenting the standard menu options. "If I am walking my daughter down the aisle in front of 200 people, we cannot serve dry poultry. It reflects poorly on the family name. We need something that shows we have class." I took a slow sip of my water to suppress a laugh. The only thing reflecting poorly on the family was the man sitting at the head of the table, who had not paid a single bill in 2 decades. But I kept my expression neutral, nodding in agreement. "Richard is right," I said, leaning forward. "This is a major celebration. We need a menu that makes a statement. Manager, what are the premium options?" The catering manager's face lit up. "We have a surf and turf option featuring butter-poached Maine lobster tails and a center-cut filet mignon. However, that package is an upgrade. It adds an additional $100 per guest." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Clifton, we have 200 guests confirmed. That is an extra $20,000 just for the food. Are you sure?" I reached over and patted Eleanor's hand, my fingers cold. "Eleanor, I want you to be proud when you face your friends from the garden club. I want everyone to talk about Chloe's wedding for years through. Let them have the lobster. Let them have the filet mignon." Richard leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his red face. "Now that is what I am talking about," he muttered, reaching for his scotch. "Good call, Bob. A man's got to know when to spend." He called me Bob. He did not even bother to remember my name, despite the fact that I was currently funding the luxury lifestyle he was pretending to host. I did not correct him. In the corporate world, when your opponent is making a fatal mistake, you do not interrupt them. When the manager returned with the updated contract for the surf and turf upgrade, the deposit required to lock in the kitchen staff was $7,000. I looked at Chloe, finding a look of mild annoyance. Chloe, my brokerage transfer is still processing until Monday morning, I said, shaking my head. Put this deposit on Logan's card as well. I will write one single reimbursement check for the florist and the caterer on Monday at 9 a.m. It makes the accounting much cleaner. Logan looked pale, but Chloe was already grabbing his wallet. Do it, Logan, she whispered. Clifton is covering it anyway on Monday. Don't be embarrassing. Logan slowly handed over his card. The transaction cleared. In less than 2 hours, these two had accumulated $12,000 in personal debt on Logan's emergency credit card, with contracts signed in their own names. They were feasting on a future that was about to vanish. Later that afternoon, I left Eleanor and Chloe at a bridal boutique and drove to a small, quiet coffee shop 3 towns over. I did not want to be seen in Greenwich. I walked to a corner booth where Lawrence Drake was waiting for me. Sitting next to him was a sharp-looking man in a tailored gray suit named Mr. Holt, the representative for the private equity firm, specializing in distressed property acquisitions. On the table between us lay a thick stack of legal documents. I sat down, put on my reading glasses, and reviewed the contract. The purchase price for my Greenwich estate was listed at $2.1 million. The property was appraised at $8 million the previous year. It was a massive financial hit, a loss of $700,000 in equity. As a former Marine and a veteran CFO, I had spent my entire life avoiding deals like this. But today I was not buying a house. I was buying speed, silence, and absolute legal protection. The terms are set, Clifton, Lawrence Drake said, pointing to the signature line. Mr. Holt's firm has already verified the title. The funds are ready to be wired directly to your offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The closing will take place Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. And the leaseback provision? I asked, looking at Mr. Holt. It is in the contract, Mr. Barlow, Holt replied, his voice professional and dry. You have a leaseback period of exactly 7 days. You will pay a prorated rent for the week. On the 8th day, which is next Monday at 9 a.m., our property management team will take physical possession. We will change the locks, secure the perimeter, and if necessary, execute a formal eviction of any remaining occupants. We have a crew ready. Excellent, I said. I picked up my fountain pen. The black ink flowed smoothly onto the paper as I signed my name. With each stroke, I felt the weight of the massive Greenwich mansion lifting off my shoulders. The heated pool, the manicured lawns, the home theater I never used, and the wine cellar Richard Vance was currently planning to raid. It was no longer my concern. It belonged to Mr. Holt's firm now. Lawrence Drake picked up the signed documents, checking the notary stamps. The transaction is ironclad, Clifton. Eleanor has no legal claim to this house. The postnuptial agreement she signed 5 years ago after the Atlantic City incident explicitly waives any interest in your premarital property, including the Greenwich estate. The court will recognize this sale as valid, and Mr. Holt's firm is a bona fide purchaser for value. There is no legal avenue for her to block this. Thank you, Lawrence, I said, taking off my glasses. Now we wait for Monday. I drove back to Greenwich. As I pulled into the long driveway, I saw Eleanor standing on the front porch, holding paint swatches against the white pillars. She waved at me, a bright, superficial smile on her face. Clifton, she called out as I stepped out of the car. I was thinking, since we are upgrading the wedding, we should really repaint the exterior of the house next month. This white is looking a bit dingy. I was thinking of a soft cream color. It would look so elegant. I stood at the bottom of the steps, looking at the woman who was planning renovations on a house that now belonged to a corporate holding company. Cream sounds nice. Eleanor, I said softly. I knew you would agree, she said, hooking her arm through mine. Oh, and Chloe was saying we should convert your study into a nursery next year. You don't really use it that much anyway. You could move your desk to the basement. It would make so much more room for the baby when she and Logan start a family. The basement, I repeated, tasting the irony. We will see, Eleanor, we will see. Sunday afternoon was spent at the boutique tailor shop in downtown Greenwich. I stood in the fitting room, watching the tailor pin the fabric of my charcoal Armani suit around Richard Vance. The suit was made of premium Italian wool, a piece I had purchased last year to wear to a major corporate gala where I was honored for my service as CFO. It was my favorite suit representing decades of hard work and professional dignity. Now, it was being adjusted to fit the beer-soaked frame of a man who had spent the last 20 years avoiding child support. Richard stood in front of the three-way mirror, turning left and right, running his thick, dirty fingers over the smooth lapels. He looked at his reflection with an air of pure vanity. "Not bad, Bob," Richard said, smirking at me through the mirror. "You have good taste, little tight in the shoulders, but I make it work. A real man needs some room to breathe, you know." "You look appropriate, Richard," I said, my voice completely flat. "I am sure Chloe will be pleased with the photos." Richard chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. He turned around, leaning against the wooden pedestal, and lowered his voice so the tailor, who was adjusting the cuffs, could not hear us. "You know, Bob, I got to give it to you. You are taking this whole thing a lot better than I expected. I thought a big-shot corporate guy like you would put up a fight about the invitation, but you just rolled over." I looked him in the eye, keeping my face a mask of polite indifference. "I am a pragmatist, Richard. Chloe wants her biological father to walk her down the aisle. I have no interest in standing in the way of family dynamics." Richard's smirk grew wider, filled with quiet malice. "That is the thing, isn't it? You can buy them the houses in Greenwich, you can pay for the expensive NYU degrees, you can write checks for the weddings. But at the end of the day, blood calls to blood. You are just the resource, Bob. I am the source. When the curtain goes up, they want the real father on stage, not the guy who paid for the ticket." I felt the cold, hard logic of my Marine training click into place. I did not feel angry. I felt the absolute satisfaction of a predator watching its prey step into the jaws of a trap. "You are absolutely correct, Richard," I said softly. "Blood is indeed thicker than water." Richard patted his stomach, looking back at the mirror. "Hey, speaking of resources, Logan and I were thinking about the bachelor party next weekend. We want to do it right, Vegas. Just a quick weekend trip. High-stakes tables, private lounges. We are going to need a little injection of funds to pull it off. You know, to keep the aesthetic going. What do you say?" The man had no shame. He was standing in my suit, having just insulted my position in the family, and was now asking me to finance a trip to Las Vegas for himself and Chloe's lazy fiancé. "Send me this itinerary," I said, putting my hands in my pockets. "I will take care of it." Richard clapped me on the shoulder, his hand heavy and smelling of tobacco. "You're a good sport, Bob. I don't care what Eleanor says about you being a boring corporate stiff. You're all right in my book." I mentally added the Las Vegas bachelor party to the list of reservations I would cancel on Monday morning. "Oh, by the way," I said, reaching into my pocket, "you will need a pocket square to complete the look. The Armani suit looks incomplete without it." I pulled out a folded white silk handkerchief. Tucked deep within the crisp folds of the silk was a tiny high-fidelity digital voice recorder. It was no larger than a stick of chewing gum, equipped with a 48-hour battery and a sensitive microphone designed to capture clear audio even through thick fabric. I had purchased it years ago for corporate board meetings, but today it had a much more critical purpose. I stepped forward and carefully placed the folded silk handkerchief into the breast pocket of the Armani suit. I patted the pocket gently, ensuring the device was secure and pointing outward. "There," I said, smoothing the lapel. "Perfect. You look like the host of the wedding." "Damn right," Richard said, admiring the pocket square. "I am going to keep this suit on for the rest of the evening. Break it in, you know. I'm meeting Logan and Eleanor at the hotel bar downtown to celebrate the upgrades." "By all means," I replied. "Enjoy your evening." I watched him strut out of the tailor shop, the fabric of my favorite suit stretching against his back. He was wearing the wire. He was walking directly into a crowded bar to drink alcohol with my wife and my stepdaughter's fiancé. I knew Richard Vance. I knew that after 3 scotches, his arrogance would take over. He would brag about how he had manipulated me. He would talk about the plan to sell the Greenwich house and buy his new truck. And my recorder would capture every single word. I walked out of the shop and got into my car. The Greenwich streets were quiet, lined with oak trees and expensive boutiques. I pulled out my laptop, connected to my car's Wi-Fi, and logged into the private trust account I had established 10 years ago for Chloe's future children. The account held $200,000, funded entirely by my corporate bonuses. I clicked on the tab labeled Beneficiaries. I highlighted Chloe's name. Without hesitation, I pressed the backspace key. Her name vanished from the screen. In the empty field, I typed a new beneficiary. The Wounded Warrior Project. I clicked Confirm. The screen flashed a bright green, transaction successful, changes saved. I closed the laptop and placed it in the passenger seat. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the dashboard. The stage was set. The legal documents were signed. The accounts were prepared. The wire was active. Tomorrow was Monday. The audit was about to begin, and the balance sheet was going to show exactly $0 for the family that had betrayed me. Monday morning arrived under a blanket of heavy gray clouds. I stood in the kitchen, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. This was the day of the execution. The plan was set, and the timeline was tight. Eleanor and Chloe were already awake, sitting at the counter in their silk bathrobes, looking tired from a weekend of wedding planning. I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 thick, heavy envelopes made of high-quality cardstock. I placed them on the counter next to Eleanor's green juice. "I think you two need a break," I said, keeping my voice gentle and full of simulated concern. "You have both been working so hard to make this wedding perfect. I booked you 2 nights at the Sanctuary Spa in the Berkshires. The full package: deep tissue massages, facial treatments, and private cabins. You leave this morning. The car service will be here at 10 a.m. Chloe's eyes went wide. She snatched the envelope, tearing it open. "The Sanctuary? Clifton, this place has a 6-month waiting list. It is like $2,000 a night. I have my connections," I lied smoothly. "You need to look rested and glowing for the photos on Saturday. Go, relax. Do not worry about the house or the vendors. I will take care of everything here." Eleanor looked at me, tears of surprise welling in her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked at me with what seemed like genuine affection. She walked around the marble counter and threw her arms around my neck. "You are the most thoughtful husband, Clifton. I do not know what we would do without you. You will find out in exactly 24 hours, I thought as I pat her back. "Go pack," I said aloud. "The Lincoln Navigator will be in the driveway in an hour." For the next hour, the house was a whirlwind of packing. They filled expensive leather duffel bags with designer clothes, laughing and chatting about the treatments they were going to receive. They were completely disconnected from the reality of their financial situation, floating on the illusion of my unlimited wealth. At 10 a.m. sharp, a black luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. The driver loaded their luggage into the back. Chloe rolled down her window and blew me a kiss. "Bye, Dad, you're the best." It was the first time in 10 years she had called me Dad without immediately following it with a request for money. It was also the last time she would ever speak to me. I stood on the porch, waving, until the SUV turned the corner and disappeared behind the tall hedges of the estate. The moment the SUV was out of sight, the smile fell from my face. I walked back inside and stood in the silent foyer. It was 10:05 a.m. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Lawrence Drake. "Escrow closed. $2.1 million has been successfully wired to your account in the Cayman Islands. Title has been transferred to Holt's Holding Company. You are now officially a tenant." I immediately opened my banking application on my phone. I dialed the private client service line for my financial institution. "This is Clifton Barlow," I said, giving my security PIN. "I need to freeze all credit cards associated with my primary account, effective immediately. This includes the authorized user cards held by Eleanor Barlow and Chloe Barlow. I also need to suspend access to the household checking account." "Understood, Mr. Barlow," the representative replied. "The cards have been deactivated and the checking account is now locked. Is there anything else?" "No, that is all. Thank you." I hung up. The cards in Eleanor and Chloe's wallets were now useless pieces of plastic. I walked to the front door, opened it, and watched as 2 massive white moving trucks from Titan Logistics rolled up the long driveway. I had hired a premium, white-glove relocation company that specialized in high-value estate moves. The foreman, a tall professional man named Miller, walked up the steps with a tablet in his hand. "Mr. Barlow," Miller said, shaking my hand, "we have the inventory list you provided. We are ready to begin the pack-out. You wanted us to prioritize the high-value personal assets, correct?" "Correct, Miller," I said, stepping aside to let his crew into the house. "I want to be very specific. If I purchase the item with my own funds, it goes into the trucks. If Eleanor purchased it, or if it is cheap laminate furniture, it stays in the house. I want the contrast between what I paid for and what they own to be absolutely clear." Miller nodded, his face serious. "Understood. My crew knows exactly what to do. We will have the ground floor cleared in 3 hours. I stood in the center of the foyer and directed traffic like a logistics officer in the Marines. I watched as the movers carefully wrapped my grand piano in thick protective blankets. The piano was a Steinway that had cost me $60,000. Eleanor did not play it. She simply used it to display framed photos of her upscale friends. "Take it," I said. They moved to the formal living room. The thick, hand-woven Persian rugs were rolled up, exposing the bare oak floorboards underneath. The designer leather sofas were carried out, followed by the 75-inch television. The crew unmounted the screen, leaving a stark rectangle on the wall where it had once hung. In the dining room, the solid mahogany table that could seat 12 was carefully disassembled and loaded into the truck. In its place, I instructed the crew to set up a wobbly, scratched card table that Eleanor had brought into our marriage 15 years ago. It sat in the middle of the grand empty room, looking incredibly pathetic. By 2 p.m., the Greenwich mansion looked like a warehouse that was going out of business. The echo in the empty hallways was profound. My footsteps clicked loudly on the bare hardwood. The house had been stripped of the insulation of wealth. It was no longer a home, it was just a concrete box with a roof. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom. I stripped the Egyptian cotton sheets from the mattress, rolled them up, and threw them in a box. I had the movers load the $5 zeros and memory foam mattress into the truck, leaving only the bare wooden box spring sitting on the floor. It was a petty move, but then I remembered Eleanor laughing on the phone about moving my desk to the basement. I walked into the massive walk-in closet. My side was completely empty. Eleanor's side was still filled with rows of designer dresses, fur coats, and expensive shoes. I did not touch a single thread of her clothes. I wanted her to have her costumes. She would need them to maintain the illusion of wealth when she was standing in the eviction court. The final room to pack was the temperature-controlled wine cellar in the basement. It was a custom-built cedar room containing 300 bottles of rare vintages, Napa Valley Cabernets, French Bordeaux, and single malt scotches that I had carefully collected over 25 years. Richard Vance had already raided the cellar during the weekend, drinking my 20-year-old scotch and leaving empty glasses on the antique tables. I had the movers pack every single bottle into specialty wooden crates. I looked at the empty cedar racks. On the very bottom shelf, I left 2 bottles of $10 grocery store Chardonnay. It was the same cheap brand Eleanor used to buy before she met me and developed a taste for premium vineyards. "Why are we leaving these, Mr. Barlow?" one of the movers asked, looking at the 2 lonely bottles. "So they have something to drink when they realize their lives are over," I replied. By 5 p.m., the relocation crew had finished. The 2 massive trucks were loaded, locked, and ready to head to a private storage facility in New Jersey that I had leased under a corporate LLC name. The foreman handed me the digital tablet. I signed my name for the final time in that house. The movers climbed into the trucks and drove down the long driveway, leaving the estate in a heavy, echoing silence. I walked back into the kitchen. The marble countertops were bare. The refrigerator was empty, its ice maker turned off. In the center of the kitchen island, I placed a large white envelope. Inside the envelope were copies of the Greenwich estate sale contract, the deed transfer confirmation to Holt's private equity firm, the cancellations receipts for Eleanor and Chloe's authorized credit cards, and a copy of the postnuptial agreement they had both conveniently forgotten. I walked out to the garage, retrieved a single, gray, metal folding chair, and brought it into the kitchen. I placed the chair in the middle of the empty room, directly facing the white envelope on the counter. It looked like an art installation, a monument to consequences. Before I left, I walked down the long hallway and took down all the framed family photos. Photos of Chloe's graduation from NYU, Eleanor and me on a cruise to the Mediterranean, and even a photo of Richard Vance holding a beer at a backyard barbecue I had paid for. I did not want them, and I certainly did not want them in my storage unit. I stacked them neatly on the floor, face down, leaning against the bare wall. I picked up my 2 suitcases, walked out the back door, and locked it. I stood on the porch, feeling the cool autumn wind on my face. I walked to the front door, placed the heavy brass key inside the lockbox I had installed on the railing earlier that morning, and scrambled the code. I walked down the stone steps, got into my Mercedes, and started the engine. I looked at the house one last time in the rearview mirror. The white pillars looked cold in the fading light. The house that had once represented my dream of a family was now just a real estate transaction. I put the car in gear and drove away without looking back. I drove 3 towns over and parked in the lot of a 24-hour diner. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window watching the digital clock on my dashboard. It was 9 a.m. on the East Coast, but I was already running on my own timeline. At 9:15 a.m., my phone began to vibrate. It was a text message from Chloe. Clifton, I am at the spa reception trying to check in. The receptionist says your credit card was declined. It is incredibly embarrassing. Can you call the bank and fix this immediately? We are waiting, I did not reply. I locked my phone and set it on the table. At 9:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was the real estate agent from Holt's firm. Mr. Barlow, this is Holt's office. Our property inspectors have just arrived at the Greenwich estate to verify the condition of the house. They are reporting that there are still personal belongings in the closets, and there is a woman's wardrobe in the master bedroom. Are the occupants ready to vacate? The house is sold, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. The occupants have 7 days to remove their personal items under the leaseback agreement. On the 8th day, you are legally authorized to change the locks and evict anyone remaining. Please proceed according to the contract. Understood, Mr. Barlow. We will log the inspection and prepare the paperwork. At 10 a.m., the real storm began. My phone lit up with consecutive calls. Eleanor, Chloe, Logan, the florist, Jillian, calling about the canceled transaction. The caterer demanding to know why the deposit had been flagged. The hotel manager where Richard Vance had hosted his pre-wedding drinks. I watched the screen flash name after name. For 15 years, the sound of my phone ringing had filled me with anxiety, knowing it was always a request for money, a credit card alert, or a family emergency I had to resolve. But today, the silence of not answering was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I let it ring until the battery was halfway drained. Then I turned the device off completely. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and drove toward JFK Airport. I had a one-way ticket to Tuscany in my pocket, and a new life waiting for me on the other side of the Atlantic. But before I boarded my flight, I had one final task to complete. I needed to download the data from the digital recorder I had hidden in Richard Vance's suit pocket. Before I boarded my flight to Europe, I checked into a private lounge at JFK Airport. The room was quiet, filled with travelers focused on their laptops. I sat in a secluded corner booth, opened my computer, and pulled the digital recorder from my travel bag. I had retrieved the device earlier that morning at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, right before I left the Greenwich estate. As I had walked through the living room, I found Richard Vance passed out on the leather sofa. He was snoring heavily, his mouth open, smelling of cheap scotch and stale cigarettes. The charcoal Armani suit jacket was draped over the back of the sofa. I had walked over silently, slipped my hand into the breast pocket, and retrieved the tiny recorder. I replaced it with a plain silk handkerchief from my suitcase so the pocket would not look empty if he checked. Richard had not even stirred. Now, sitting in the airport lounge, I plugged the USB end of the recorder into my laptop and put on my noise-canceling headphones. I opened the audio folder and clicked on the file labeled Sunday Night. The audio began with the loud, ambient noise of a busy hotel bar, the clinking of glasses, laughter, and jazz music playing in the background. Then Richard's voice came through, clear and loud. To the old ATM. Richard shouted, followed by the clink of 3 glasses. May his cash flow never dry up. Seriously, Logan's voice chimed in, sounding slightly slurred from alcohol. Clifton actually told me to put the upgraded deposits on my card. He said he would reimburse me Monday morning when the markets open. I put $12,000 on my emergency card tonight. If he does not write that check, my parents are going to freeze my access. Do not worry, Logan, Eleanor's voice replied, her tone dripping with a cold, calculating confidence I had never heard from her in person. Clifton always pays. He has spent 15 years cleaning up our messes because he is terrified of conflict. He is an old Marine, but he is soft when it comes to family. He thinks if he writes enough checks, we will actually respect him. He really is a pathetic old fool. Richard laughed. He stood there in the tailor shop smoothing the lapels of his own suit for me. I even asked him to finance our Vegas bachelor party next weekend, and he did not even blink. He just asked for the itinerary. I told you, Eleanor said. He is useful. We just need to keep him sweet until the wedding is over and the Maldives honeymoon is settled. That is another $20,000 we need him to cover. After that, I am going to start working on him to sell the Greenwich estate. What about the post-nuptial agreement? Richard asked, his voice dropping slightly. You told me he made you sign something after you got into that mess in Atlantic City. Eleanor scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound that sent a cold thrill down my spine. Oh, that old piece of paper. Clifton will never enforce it. He is too weak. He loves me too much to ever throw me out on the street. I will tell him the stairs are getting too hard for his knees, convince him to downsize to a small one-bedroom condo in Florida and cash out the equity. We can use the funds to get you that new Ford F-250 truck you wanted, Richard, and we can finally buy that cabin in Maine. That is my girl, Richard said. Let the old corporate stiff pay for our retirement. I sat in the airport lounge, listening to the recording loop for a second time. I did not feel hurt. I did not feel the sting of betrayal. What I felt was the absolute vindication of a mathematician who had just verified a complex equation. Every assumption I had made about their parasite-like nature was correct. They had never loved me. They had never even respected me. I was simply a financial utility, a host to be drained of resources and then discarded in a cheap Florida condo while they consumed the equity of my life's work. I stopped the recording. I opened my email and attached the high-fidelity audio file. I addressed the message to Lawrence Drake. Lawrence T., I wrote. Here is the audio recording from Sunday night. It contains Eleanor Barlow, Richard Vance, and Logan conspiring to liquidate my premarital estate and commit financial fraud. Please add this to the case file for the divorce proceedings. Keep this secure until the court date. I clicked send. The email vanished into the digital space. I closed my laptop and placed it in my travel bag. I looked out the large glass window of the lounge at the airplanes lining the tarmac. The sun was beginning to break through the gray clouds, casting a bright, clean light over the runway. I picked up my passport, walked out of the lounge, and headed toward the boarding gate for my flight to Florence. The boarding call was already sounding through the speakers. I handed my ticket to the gate agent, who smiled and wished me a pleasant flight. As I walked down the jet bridge, I turned my phone back on for one brief second. It immediately began to vibrate with 40 missed calls and 50 text messages. The messages from Eleanor had shifted from confusion to panic and finally to pure rage. Clifton, where are you? The bank says the checking account is closed. My credit card was declined at the spa. They are threatening to kick us out. Answer your phone. I smiled, slid the power button to the off position, and slipped the phone into my pocket. Let them scream. The flight to Tuscany was 8 hours long, and by the time I landed, the new owners of the Greenwich estate would be making their first official visit. It was Wednesday afternoon when the black Lincoln Navigator pulled back into the long, circular driveway of the Greenwich estate. Eleanor and Chloe stepped out of the vehicle, their skin glowing from 2 days of premium clay masks, seaweed wraps, and mineral baths. They were laughing, carrying their designer weekend bags, completely relaxed. Chloe was scrolling through her phone, chatting about the final detail meeting with the wedding coordinator scheduled for the next morning. The first indication that something was wrong was the absolute silence of the property. Usually, the estate hummed with activity. The automated sprinkler system, the pool filtration unit, the central air conditioning, and the outdoor landscape speakers always created a low, expensive hum of affluent living. But today, the estate was dead silent. The curtains in the front windows had been removed, leaving the glass looking like dark, empty sockets. Eleanor walked up the stone steps to the double oak front doors, her heels clicking sharply. She reached for the heavy brass handle. It was locked. She raised her hand to the keyless entry pad and punched in her personal 6-digit access code. Beep. Red. Light. She frowned, muttering under her breath, and punched the digits in again, slower this time. Beep. Red light. Chloe, try your code, Eleanor said, a slight edge of irritation creeping into her voice. Clifton must have reset the security panel again. You know how paranoid he is about cybersecurity. Chloe walked up, rolling her eyes, and entered her code. Beep. Red light. What is going on? Chloe grumbled, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders as the cool autumn wind swept across the porch. Is Clifton inside? Why is he not answering the door? Eleanor walked to the tall, narrow glass panel next to the door and shielded her eyes. Peering into the foyer, she froze, her breath caught in her throat. Mom, what is it? Chloe asked, stepping up behind her. Through the glass, the grand foyer looked like an abandoned museum. The massive crystal chandelier still hung from the ceiling, but the floor was completely bare. The $25,000 silk Persian rug was gone, leaving the dark oak floorboards exposed. The antique console table, the gilded mirror, and the oil paintings that had lined the hallway were missing. Only the metal hooks remained, protruding from the bare drywall like tiny pointing fingers. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "We've been robbed, Chloe. We've been cleared out." They ran down the steps, their designer bags dropping onto the manicured grass. They scrambled around the side of the house toward the back patio, checking the windows as they went. Every room they looked into was the same. The formal living room was a hollow vault. My leather armchairs, the custom-built entertainment center, and the 75-inch television were gone. The only thing left in the dining room was the wobbly, scratched card table Eleanor had brought into our marriage 15 years ago, sitting wobbly in the center of the vast empty space. They reached the kitchen patio doors. Eleanor pressed her face against the glass. The kitchen was completely stripped. The granite island was bare, except for a large white envelope sitting in the center. Directly facing the envelope was a single, gray metal folding chair from the garage. Eleanor pulled out her phone and frantically dialed my number. "We're sorry, the customer you are trying to reach is not available. Please leave a message after the tone. He is not answering." Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking with rising panic. "He has his phone turned off. Call Logan," Chloe yelled, her hand shaking as she searched her own phone. "Call Logan right now." Before Eleanor could dial, Chloe's phone rang. It was Logan. Chloe answered on the first ring, putting it on speaker. "Logan, thank God. Something is happening at the house. We cannot get in and all the furniture is—" "Chloe," Logan interrupted, his voice sounding high-pitched and hyperventilating. "My card is blocked. The bank just called my parents. They said my emergency credit card has $12,000 in unauthorized charges from the florist and the caterer. My dad is screaming at me. He says if we do not clear the balance today, he is going to cancel his co-signature and report the transactions as fraud." "Where is Clifton? He was supposed to write the check today." "Clifton is not answering his phone," Chloe cried. "Logan, the house is empty. We are locked out." "What do you mean empty?" Logan stammered. "How can it be empty?" Eleanor snatched the phone from Chloe's hand. "Logan, go to your parents' house. We are going to find out what is happening. I am calling Lawrence Drake." Eleanor dialed the office number for my attorney. Lawrence was not the kind of lawyer who hid behind receptionists. He answered his own line when a case was in motion. "Drake," the calm, raspy voice answered. "Lawrence!" Eleanor screamed into the phone. "This is Eleanor Barlow. Someone has robbed our house. All the furniture is gone, the locks are changed, and Clifton is missing. We are standing on the lawn in our bathrobes. Call the police immediately." "Calm down, Mrs. Barlow," Lawrence said, his tone dry and professional. "There has been no robbery, and the police will not assist you." Eleanor stopped screaming, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What do you mean? Who took my furniture?" "The furniture paid for by Mr. Barlow has been moved to a secure storage facility," Lawrence explained. "As for the house, it was sold to a private equity holding company on Monday morning. The transaction closed at 9 a.m. The new owners have granted a 7-day leaseback period, which is currently in effect. You have exactly 5 days remaining to pack your personal wardrobe and any items you brought into the marriage. On next Monday at 9 a.m. sharp, the property management team will take physical possession of the estate. The locks will be changed and any remaining occupants will be formally evicted." Eleanor stood on the lawn, the phone pressed to her ear, her face turning a pale, sickly white. "He sold the house? He cannot sell the house. I am his wife. My name is on the deed." "No, Mrs. Barlow, it is not," Lawrence said, the sound of paper rustling over the line. "Your name was never added to the deed due to your financial liabilities 5 years ago. Furthermore, under Clause 2 of the postnuptial agreement you signed on October 14, 2021, you explicitly waived all claims to the Greenwich estate and any assets purchased with Mr. Barlow's premarital funds. The sale is completely legal, and the title has already transferred." I was coerced into signing that," Eleanor choked out, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I did not have a lawyer. You had ample opportunity to secure counsel, Mrs. Barlow. And the $150 Zuzan bank draft used to clear your Atlantic City gambling debts is attached to the contract as consideration. The agreement is fully binding. I suggest you contact a moving company. You have 5 days." The line went dead. Eleanor dropped her phone onto the manicured lawn. She stood there, her body shaking, staring at the double oak doors as if she expected me to walk out and tell her it was all a joke. But the doors remained shut, cold and silent. "Mom," Chloe said, her voice rising in a high-pitched panic. "What do we do? We cannot just stand here. All my clothes, my bags, my jewelry, they are inside. We have to get in." "There is a spare key," Eleanor muttered, her eyes darting around the porch. "In the fake plastic rock near the pool filter. Clifton put it there years ago." They ran to the back of the house, scrambling through the flower beds. Chloe found the plastic rock and flipped the cover open. It was empty. I had removed the key on Monday morning before locking the box. "It is gone!" Chloe cried, throwing the plastic rock into the swimming pool. It splashed loudly, bobbing on the surface of the water. "He took it!" Eleanor looked around, her face twisted in a mixture of fear and rage. She walked over to the patio and picked up a heavy slate stone from the border of the flower bed. Without hesitation, she smashed it against the small glass pane of the French doors leading into the kitchen. The glass shattered with a loud crack, raining shards onto the linoleum floor inside. Eleanor reached her hand through the broken frame, turned the brass deadbolt, and pushed the door open. They stepped inside. The kitchen was freezing. I had set the digital thermostat to 55 degrees and locked the panel before leaving, ensuring the heating system would run at the absolute minimum to protect the pipes. The house smelled of nothing, no cooking, no expensive candles, no perfume, just empty drywall and cold air. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the bare floors as they walked the kitchen island. Eleanor reached for the large white envelope. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a typed letter from me. "Eleanor and Chloe," it read. "On Friday night you explained to me that I was not family. You told me I was not photogenic enough to be a father, and that my name was an embarrassment on the wedding invitation. You said I was just the man who wrote the checks, so I did exactly what you asked. I stopped writing the checks. I closed the accounts, deactivated the credit cards, and liquidated my Greenwich estate. This house now belongs to Holt's Holding Company. Under the leaseback agreement, you have exactly 7 days to remove your personal wardrobe. On Monday morning, the eviction crew will arrive to remove whatever is left. As for the wedding, the contracts are in your names and the financial liability is yours. Enjoy your special day." Eleanor let out a low, choking sob, dropping the letter onto the counter. He really did it. He sold everything. This is illegal," Chloe screamed, kicking the metal folding chair. It clattered loudly against the bare floorboards. He cannot just sell the house and leave us with nothing. I have $65,000 in wedding deposits on Logan's card. The florist, the caterer, the venue, they are going to sue us. Before Eleanor could answer, the loud, sputtering rumble of a rusted engine echoed from the front driveway. A moment later, the front door was rattled violently. When it did not open, heavy footsteps marched around the side of the house. Richard Vance burst through the broken French doors, his face red with fury. He was wearing the charcoal Armani suit jacket, but it was heavily wrinkled, smelling of cheap beer and sweat. He had worn it to the bar on Sunday night and had apparently slept in it. "Eleanor!" Richard roared, storming into the kitchen. "What the hell is going on? My debit card was declined at the gas station, and the manager of the hotel bar downtown just called my cell phone. He said the $1,500 bar tab from Sunday night was reversed. He said if I do not pay the balance by tomorrow morning, they are going to file a police report for theft of services. Where is Bob? Where is that old fool?" Eleanor looked at him, her eyes vacant and filled with tears. "Bob is gone, Richard. He sold the house." Richard stopped, his mouth falling open. He looked around the empty kitchen, noticing for the first time the wobbly card table in the dining room and the bare walls. "What do you mean he sold the house? He cannot sell the house. We were supposed to cash out the equity next month. What about my new truck? What about the cabin in Maine? He had a post-nuptial agreement." Eleanor sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "His lawyer said it is ironclad. I waived all my rights 5 years ago when he paid off the Atlantic City debt. The house belongs to a corporation now. We have 5 days to get out." Richard grabbed the typed letter from the counter, his eyes scanning the lines. His knuckles turned white, the fabric of my Armani suit straining against his shoulders. "This is a joke," he muttered. "This has to be a joke. He cannot do this to us. He is just an accountant." "He is not an accountant, Richard," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a hollow, terrified whisper as the reality of the situation finally settled on her. "He was the chief financial officer of a multi-billion-dollar company, and he just audited us." The temperature in the empty kitchen seemed to drop even further as the silence returned. The three of them stood around the marble counter, looking at each other like survivors of a shipwreck who had just realized there were no rescue boats. "We need to call the police," Eleanor said, her voice shaking as she clutched her bathrobe around her. "Clifton cannot just do this. We have been married for 15 years. I have rights. A wife has rights to her husband's property. Mom, did you not hear what Lawrence Drake said?" Chloe cried, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You signed a post-nuptial agreement. You signed away your rights to this house and his retirement accounts 5 years ago when he bailed you out of the gambling debt. The house is already sold. It belongs to a corporation now. The police cannot do anything about a legal real estate sale." "I did not read it," Eleanor screamed, slamming her hand on the counter. "I was in panic. I thought he was just protecting his pension. I never thought he would actually sell the roof over my head." Before Chloe could reply, the sound of tires screeching echoed from the driveway. A moment later, Logan burst through the broken French doors. He looked completely disheveled, his tie undone, his face pale and sweating. He was clutching his phone in a trembling hand. "Chloe!" Logan gasped, his eyes darting around the empty house in shock. "What is this? Where is the furniture? What is happening?" "Clifton sold the house, Logan," Chloe said, tears running down her face. "He froze all the accounts. He canceled the credit cards." "My dad is on the phone," Logan said, holding up the screen. "He is screaming. The bank just called him because the balance on the emergency card we co-signed has reached its limit of $65,000. He is on speaker." Logan pressed a button on the screen. A loud, booming voice filled the cold kitchen. It was Logan's father, Donald. "Logan!" Donald roared. "I want answers, and I want them now. The bank just flagged $65,000 in charges for wedding deposits on the card I co-signed. You told me Clifton Barlow was paying for the entire wedding. The bank says the checking account listed for the reimbursement check is closed. What is going on?" "Mr. Barlow," Eleanor said, stepping closer to the phone. "This is Eleanor. There has been a financial misunderstanding. Clifton has temporarily frozen the accounts. We are trying to reach him to clear this up." "Misunderstanding?" Donald scoffed, his voice dripping with rage. Eleanor, my corporate lawyers just checked the public records. The Greenwich estate was sold to a private equity firm on Monday morning. The transaction is complete. Clifton Barlow has moved his assets and closed his local accounts. He is gone. My son has $65,000 in debt under his name, and my credit is on the line. I am giving you 24 hours to wire the funds to clear that balance. If the money is not in the account by tomorrow noon, I am filing a formal lawsuit against Chloe and you for fraudulent inducement. I will also instruct the bank to report the credit card as stolen to protect my credit rating. Do you understand? Me? 24 hours. Dad, please, Logan stammered. Shut up, Logan, Donald snapped. You got played by a family of grifters. Clear the balance or face the consequences. The line went dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. Logan looked at Chloe, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and anger. Chloe, you told me Clifton was paying for everything, Logan shouted. You told me to put the deposits on my card because it was just a temporary hold. I trusted you. He told us to, Chloe yelled back, defending herself. He sat at the florist and the caterer and told us to put it on your card. He said he would reimburse us on Monday morning. Did he write it down? Logan asked, his voice cracking. Did he send a text? Do you have an email? A contract? Anything? Chloe frantically opened her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she searched her message history with me. She scrolled back through the last few days, her face growing increasingly pale. There was nothing. I had never sent a single text promising to pay for the upgrades. When she had asked about the champagne, I had simply replied, "Order whatever you want." When we were at the florist, I had verbally suggested putting the deposit on Logan's card. But I had never put the promise of reimbursement in writing. There was no paper trail. There was no contract. In the eyes of the law, Logan had voluntarily signed the agreements and authorized the charges on his own credit card. There is nothing, Chloe whispered, her phone slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the counter. He never texted it. You grifters, Logan screamed, stepping back from her. You ruined my life. My dad is going to cut me off. I am going to have a judgment on my credit before I even start my career. Hey, watch your mouth, kid. Richard Vance growled, stepping forward and pointing a finger at Logan. Do not speak to my daughter like that. Oh, shut up, Richard, Eleanor snapped, turning on him in a sudden flash of rage. You are the reason we are in this mess. If you hadn't insisted on walking Chloe down the aisle, if you hadn't demanded your name be on the invitation, Clifton would have paid the bills. You wanted to play the big shot, and now look at us. We have no house, no money, and $65. Sal's in debt. My name belongs on that invite. Richard roared back. I am her real father. You were the one who told me Bob was a soft touch. You told me we could cash out the house equity and get my truck. Do not put this on me, Eleanor. Do you have $1,500 to pay the hotel bar? Eleanor shrieked. Do you have $65,000 to pay Logan's father? No. You are a deadbeat mechanic who sleeps in my husband's suit. While the storm was raging in the cold, empty kitchen in Greenwich, I was sitting on the stone terrace of a private villa in the hills of Tuscany. The morning sun was warm, casting a golden light over the rolling hills, the olive groves, and the vineyards that stretched to the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, rosemary, and damp earth. I sat in a comfortable wrought iron chair, sipping a glass of local Chianti. The property manager, a polite Italian woman named Sophia, had welcomed me earlier that morning, showing me around the beautifully restored 18th century stone house. It had a private pool, a fully equipped study, and a kitchen that smelled of olive oil and fresh garlic. I had leased the villa for 6 months using funds from my offshore account. For the first time in 15 years, I did not feel the heavy, pressuring weight of responsibility in my chest. I did not have to look at credit card alerts. I did not have to listen to Eleanor, complaining about the social status of our neighbors, or Chloe demanding money for a new handbag. I was 65 years old, I was financially independent, and I was completely free. The audit was complete, the assets were secure, and the liabilities had been written off. Back in Connecticut, the clock was ticking. Eleanor and Chloe had exactly 5 days to pack their belongings and vacate the Greenwich estate. The reality of their situation became clear when the local utility companies cut off the electricity and gas on Friday morning, just as I had scheduled. The temperature inside the house dropped to match the autumn air outside. Without money to hire professional movers, Eleanor and Chloe were forced to pack their lives into heavy-duty black trash bags they bought from a local grocery store using the pocket cash Eleanor had saved. They spent the weekend dragging bags of designer dresses, high-heeled shoes, and expensive cosmetics down the bare oak stairs. The house echoed with the rustle of plastic and the sound of their own footsteps. It was a humiliating calm-down for two women who had spent a decade pretending to be Greenwich royalty. Richard Vance had already abandoned them. He had packed his wrinkled suit and left in his rusted truck on Thursday. Terrified of the police report the hotel bar manager was filing against him. He had his own garage business to protect, and he did not want a felony charge for theft of services on his record. When Eleanor begged him to help them move their bags, he had simply laughed, telling her that he was a mechanic, not a delivery boy. The man whose family had disappeared the moment the money stopped flowing. Eleanor spent Friday afternoon trying to secure legal representation. She sat on the floor of the empty master bedroom, her phone plugged into the single working outlet in the hallway, calling every high-profile family law firm in Fairfield County. The conversations were all the same. Barlow and Associates, a receptionist, would answer. "How can we help you?" "Yes, my name is Eleanor Barlow," Eleanor would say, her voice shaking. "I need to file for divorce, and I need an emergency injunction to block my husband from selling our home. He has cleared out our accounts and left us stranded." "Understood, Mrs. Barlow," the intake clerk would reply. "Our hourly rate for family law disputes starts at $500, and our firm requires a $15 retainer up front before we can file any emergency motions. We can schedule a consultation once the retainer is cleared." I do not have $15,000 today," Eleanor stammered. "My husband has frozen my credit cards. Can you bill him? He has millions." "I am sorry, Mrs. Barlow. We do not take cases without an upfront retainer. Good luck." After 8 phone calls, Eleanor realized that the prestigious Greenwich lawyers she had socialized with at charity events would not touch her case without cash. To them, she was not a wealthy socialite. She was an insolvent client with a high-risk profile. Finally, she found a lawyer named Mr. Geller, a small-time attorney operating out of a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. Mr. Geller was a man who handled traffic tickets, small claims disputes, and cheap divorces. He sat in a cramped office that smelled of old paper and cheap cologne, looking at Eleanor's postnuptial agreement with a squint. "It is a tough contract, Mrs. Barlow," Mr. Geller said, rubbing his chin. "Your husband's lawyer, Lawrence Drake, is a shark. He drafted this to protect the assets completely. But we can argue duress. We can claim you signed it under emotional pressure because of the gambling debts. And we can file for emergency spousal support, claiming financial abuse. He cannot just leave his wife of 15 years with zero support." "Can we stop the eviction?" Eleanor asked, her eyes desperate. "No," Geller said, shaking his head. "The house was sold to a corporate third party. They are a bona fide purchaser. We cannot block a completed real estate transaction. You will have to move out. But we can sue Mr. Barlow for alimony and a portion of the sale proceeds." "Do it," Eleanor said, signing a contingency agreement that promised Geller 40% of any settlement he recovered. "File the papers today. I want to ruin him." "We will file on Monday morning," Geller said, smiling a thin, greedy smile. "Let us see how Mr. Barlow likes a court summons." Monday morning arrived with a cold, biting drizzle. Inside the Greenwich house, Eleanor and Chloe woke up shivering on the bare floorboards of the master bedroom. They had spent the night wrapped in their winter coats, using their duffel bags as pillows. Without electricity, the house had turned into an icebox. The air was thick with the scent of damp dust and defeat. At 8:55 a.m., 3 vehicles rolled up the circular driveway. Mr. Holt, the representative from the private equity firm, got out of a black sedan accompanied by a locksmith and a sheriff's deputy. Under Connecticut law, a landlord or new owner must have a law enforcement officer present to execute a physical possession order to avoid liability. Mr. Holt walked up the stone steps and knocked loudly on the double oak doors. The sound echoed through the empty house. Eleanor opened the door, her hair disheveled, her face pale, and her eyes rimmed with red. She was still wearing the silk bathrobe I had bought her, now wrinkled and stained. "Mrs. Barlow," Mr. Holt said, his voice flat and businesslike. "It is 9 a.m. The 7-day leaseback period has officially expired. We are here to take physical possession of the property. You and your daughter must vacate the premises immediately. My lawyer filed an emergency motion this morning." Eleanor lied, her voice cracking as she tried to block the doorway. "You cannot evict us. We have a pending divorce lawsuit. The court will overturn this sale." The sheriff's deputy, a burly officer named Deputy Cooper, stepped forward, resting his hand on his belt. "Mrs. Barlow, I have the certified deed of transfer and the possession order signed by the judge last Monday. The sale is complete, and the new owner has the legal right to secure the property. There is no active stay of eviction on file. You need to step outside now. This is my home," Eleanor shrieked, her voice echoing down the empty street. "I have lived here for 15 years. My husband is a monster." From behind her, Chloe emerged, holding her iPhone in front of her face, the camera pointing at Mr. Holt and Deputy Cooper. Her voice was high-pitched and dramatic, using the exact tone she used for her social media updates. "Look at this. My mother and I are being illegally thrown on the street by my stepfather's corporate henchmen. We have no heat, no electricity, and they are threatening us with arrest. Share this video. Let everyone know what Clifton Barlow is doing." Deputy Cooper did not even look at the camera. He was a veteran officer who had seen dozens of evictions in his career. "Miss, you can record all you want, but you need to walk down the steps. If you do not leave the house by 9:05 a.m., I will arrest you both for criminal trespass. It is that simple." Mr. Holt signaled the 2 security guards behind him. "Bring out the trash bags," he ordered. The guards walked past Eleanor into the house. They began carrying the black plastic trash bags containing Eleanor and Chloe's designer clothes, shoes, and cosmetics down the stairs. They did not handle them with care. The bags were tossed onto the wet grass next to the driveway, some of them tearing open to reveal expensive silk dresses and high-heeled boots spilling onto the damp lawn. "Stop touching my things!" Chloe screamed, dropping her phone to grab a bag of her shoes. "These are designer. You are ruining them." "Step back, Miss," Deputy Cooper said, placing his arm between Chloe and the guards. Within 10 minutes, all of their belongings, about 30 black trash bags and a few duffel bags, were piled on the curb next to the mailbox. Eleanor was escorted down the stone steps by Deputy Cooper, her body shaking with cold and humiliation. Chloe followed, clutching her purse and weeping loudly. The locksmith immediately went to work. He unscrewed the keyless entry pad from the front door, replaced the deadbolts with high-security commercial locks, and installed a heavy steel lockbox on the handle. He did the same to the back doors and the garage. As the locksmith finished, Mr. Holt turned to Eleanor and Chloe, who were sitting on the wet grass next to their pile of trash bags. "The property is now secured," Holt said, handing Eleanor a legal notice. "If you set foot on this lawn again, it will be considered criminal trespass. Any inquiries regarding the sale of the house must be directed to our corporate legal team." "Have a good day." Mr. Holt, the locksmith, and the security guards got back into their vehicles and drove down the driveway, leaving only Deputy Cooper behind to monitor the transition for another 30 minutes. Eleanor and Chloe were left sitting on the curb in the cold Connecticut drizzle. The neighbors, who had been watching from behind their curtains, began to drive by slowly. Mrs. Gable, a prominent member of Eleanor's garden club, drove past in her Range Rover, slowing down to look at Eleanor sitting in her bathrobe on a pile of trash bags. She did not stop. She just looked, shook her head, and drove away. The social status Eleanor had spent 15 years building on my bank account had vanished in less than 10 minutes. She was no longer a wealthy Greenwich housewife. She was an evicted tenant sitting on the curb, surrounded by her ruined designer wardrobe. Logan arrived 30 minutes later in his dented Honda Civic. He looked completely defeated, his shoulders slumped as he stepped out of the car. He did not look like the confident young man who had demanded Dom Perignon champagne at Le Bernardin just a weekend ago. He looked like someone who had just watched his entire future go up in smoke. My dad cut me off, Logan said, his voice flat and lifeless as he looked at the pile of black trash bags on the wet curb. He took my name off the family phone plan. He canceled my car insurance, and he changed the locks on the condo he was letting me live in. He said if I do not resolve the credit card debt by tomorrow, he is going to let the bank prosecute me and Chloe for fraud. We need a place to stay, Logan, Eleanor said, shivering in her bathrobe as she stood up from the grass. We cannot sleep on the street. Do you have any money? Any cash? I have $400 in my checking account, Logan muttered, reaching into his pocket for his car keys. That is all I have left. We have to use my car to move these bags. We cannot afford a U-Haul. For the next 3 hours, they loaded the black trash bags into the back seat and trunk of Logan's Honda. It took 3 tight trips to move all of Eleanor and Chloe's clothes, shoes, and cosmetics to a cheap, damp self-storage facility in an industrial part of Stamford, Connecticut. The air inside the storage unit was cold and smelled of concrete and rust. They piled the bags on the floor, looking at the remains of their luxury lifestyle stacked in a 10 by 10 metal box. Once the bags were stored, they checked into a cheap, rundown motel on Route 1. The motel was a stark contrast to the Greenwich estate. The neon sign outside was flickering, half of the letters burnt out. The room they rented had peeling floral wallpaper, a saggy queen-size bed, and a carpet that smelled of old cigarettes and industrial bleach. It was the kind of place where people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands, weeping. My wedding is in 2 weeks. What are we going to tell everyone? The invitations are already sent. People are booking flights. The wedding is canceled, Chloe, Logan said, sitting on a plastic chair in the corner of the room. The florist and the country club caterer sent me demand letters this afternoon. They said since we canceled the services within 30 days of the event, we are legally liable for the full balance of the contracts under the breach of contract clauses. The florist is demanding $23,000 and the country club is demanding $42,000. They said if we do not pay the balance in 14 days, they will file a joint civil lawsuit against us. But Clifton was supposed to pay, Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing in the small motel room. He is the one who wanted the upgrades. He told us to do it. He told us verbally. Chloe, Logan shouted back, his patience finally snapping. But my signature is on the contracts. The florist contract has my name. The caterer contract has my name. The credit card used for the deposits was co-signed by my father. The law does not care about what Clifton said over dinner. The law cares about whose signature is on the dotted line. I am on the hook for $65,000 in debt, and we are facing another $65,000 in breach of contract lawsuits. My life is ruined. Eleanor sat in the corner, staring blankly at the flickering television screen. She looked 10 years older. The realization was finally sinking in. I had not just taken away their comfort. I had left them with a mountain of debt they could never repay. Without my income, Eleanor had no way to pay Mr. Geller, the cheap lawyer she had hired. She had no assets to use as collateral, and her credit score was ruined from her past gambling debts. Chloe pulled out her phone and opened her Instagram application. She had posted a dramatic story earlier, hoping for sympathy from her 50,000 followers. But as she scrolled through the comments, her face turned red with embarrassment. News of the Greenwich estate sale and the dramatic eviction had already leaked. In a wealthy, tight-knit suburb like Greenwich, gossip travels faster than a forest fire. Is it true you guys got kicked out of the Barlow mansion? One comment read. I saw your mom sitting on trash bags in her bathrobe today. What happened to the Vogue-worthy wedding? Another user wrote. Looks like the influencer lifestyle was just a lease, a third comment sneered. Chloe deleted the app from her phone, throwing the device against the wall. She curled into a ball on the saggy bed, crying hysterically. We need to find Clifton, Eleanor whispered, her voice hollow. We need to explain to him that we are sorry. We need to make him understand that we did not mean it. Logan let out a dry, bitter laugh. He is not in the country, Eleanor. My dad's lawyers tracked his passport. He boarded a flight to Europe on Monday morning. He is gone. He is not coming back, and he is not going to save us. While Eleanor and Chloe were settling into the Route 1 motel, Richard Vance was facing his own legal reckoning at his auto repair garage in Stamford. It was a greasy, cluttered workshop filled with the smell of engine oil and exhaust. Richard was under the hood of a client's sedan, trying to wipe the grease from his hands, when a blue and white police cruiser pulled into the lot. Two local officers, Officer Davis and Officer Briggs, stepped out of the vehicle and walked into the garage. "Richard Vance?" Officer Davis asked, adjusting his utility belt. Richard wiped his hands on a dirty rag, trying to look casual. "Yeah, that is me. What is the problem, officers? Did someone complain about the noise again?" "We have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Vance," Officer Davis said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "We have a complaint filed by the manager of the Harborview Hotel for theft of services under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53A-119. You ran up a bar tab of $1.500 on Sunday night and left the premises after your credit card was declined. The hotel has surveillance footage of you signing the slip with a card you knew was inactive." Richard's face turned red. "Hey, wait a minute. That was a misunderstanding. My ex-wife's husband was supposed to cover that tab. He is a millionaire. He frozen the accounts. I was going to pay the hotel back next week." "You can explain that to the judge," Officer Briggs said, stepping behind Richard and grabbing his wrist. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous," Richard shouted, resisting slightly. "It is a civil dispute. You do not arrest a man over a bar tab." "That is not the only warrant we have, Mr. Vance," Officer Davis said, opening a folder. "We also have a warrant for your arrest for grand larceny and felony forgery under Connecticut General Statutes Section 53A-138. The complaint was filed Monday morning by Lawrence Drake, representing Clifton Barlow." Richard froze, his body going stiff. "What? Forgery? For what?" "For the illegal transfer and sale of a 1972 Ford Bronco." Officer Davis read from the warrant. "The vehicle was registered under the sole name of Clifton Barlow. A year ago, you forged Mr. Barlow's signature on the Connecticut DMV title transfer document and sold the classic vehicle to a collector in New Jersey for $45,000 cash, pocketing the proceeds. The buyer has provided a copy of the check made out directly to your personal bank account, and the handwriting analysis of the signature on the title shows a clear forgery." Richard's eyes darted around the garage, panic finally setting in. Clifton knew about that a year ago. We talked about it. He said he would not press charges as long as I stayed away from his family. He agreed to let it go. Mr. Barlow never signed a waiver, and he never filed a release of liability, Officer Davis replied. "The statute of limitations for felony forgery in the state of Connecticut is 5 years. Mr. Barlow's attorney submitted the forged title, the check copy, and the New Jersey buyer's affidavit to the police department on Monday morning. The state's attorney approved the warrant yesterday." "He set me up," Richard whispered, his face turning pale under the grease. "The old bastard kept the paperwork for a year just to use it now." "Hands behind your back, Mr. Vance," Officer Briggs ordered, pulling Richard's arms back and clicking the steel cuffs around his wrists. Richard did not resist this time. The weight of a Class C felony charge, which carried a maximum prison sentence of 10 years in Connecticut, completely crushed his arrogance. His mechanic assistants stood in the garage bay, watching in silence as their boss was escorted out of the building. As they walked past Richard's rusted truck, Officer Davis noticed a wrinkled charcoal jacket lying on the passenger seat. "It was my Armani suit jacket." "Is that your jacket, Mr. Vance?" Davis asked. "Yeah," Richard muttered, hanging his head. "We will secure it as personal property," Davis said, retrieving the jacket and folding it over his arm. They placed Richard in the back seat of the cruiser. The door slammed shut with a heavy, metallic click. The cruiser backed out of the lot, its red and blue lights flashing against the dirty windows of the garage. I had known about the forged Bronco title for 12 months. When I first discovered the theft, I was furious, ready to call the police. But Eleanor had wept, begging me not to send Chloe's father to prison, claiming it would ruin Chloe's social standing at NYU. So, I had kept the evidence locked in my wall safe. I had held on to the forged document, the bank statements, and the buyer's contact information. I did not destroy it because as a Marine and a CFO, I knew that evidence is an asset. You do not destroy assets. You hold them until the market conditions are perfect for liquidation. Monday morning had been the perfect time to liquidate that asset. I had handed the entire folder to Lawrence Drake with one simple instruction. Bury him. Richard Vance was no longer the rugged, artistic father who was going to walk his daughter down the aisle for Vogue. He was a booking number in the county jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit, facing years in prison for felony forgery. The suit I had lent him was now sitting in an evidence locker, and the deadbeat father was out of the picture for good. The neon sign outside the Route 1 motel flickered, casting a dull orange glow through the thin plastic blinds of the room. Inside, the air was silent, heavy with the stench of cheap grease from the takeout boxes on the laminate table. Eleanor was sitting on the edge of the mattress, clutching her phone when it began to ring. She answered it, expecting it to be another collection agency or a wedding vendor. Instead, a flat, professional voice spoke. "Is this Eleanor Barlow?" the voice asked. "This is Stanford Bail Bonds. We have Richard Vance in custody at the Stanford Police Department. He is being held on a $50,000 bond for Class C felony forgery and theft of services. He listed you as his emergency contact." Eleanor felt a cold sensation in her throat. "Richard? Richard is in jail? Forgery? What are you talking about?" "The court set the bond at $50,000, the bondsman explained. "We need a 10% cash deposit, that is $5, or property collateral to secure his release. Since he does not have the funds, we are calling to see if you can cover the deposit or sign over a property lien." I do not have $5,000, Eleanor stammered, her voice cracking. "And my house. I do not own the house anymore. I have no property." "Understood, ma'am. If you cannot provide the deposit or collateral, Mr. Vance will remain in custody until his arraignment hearing on Friday morning. Have a good day." The line went dead. Eleanor dropped the phone onto the saggy bed, her body trembling. "They arrested Richard," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "Clifton reported him to the police for the classic car he sold last year. He is in jail, Chloe." Chloe stood up from the corner, her face red and swollen from crying. "For the Bronco? But Clifton knew about that a year ago. Why is he doing this now? He is trying to destroy us. Because he can, Chloe." Eleanor sobbed, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "He kept the evidence. He waited until we pushed him out, and then he handed it to the police. He has been planning this since Friday night." Before Chloe could answer, the door to the motel room opened. Logan walked in. He looked like a shell of a man, his eyes hollow and dark. He carried a single black duffel bag in his hand. He did not look at Chloe. He went straight to the closet, pulled his 3 remaining shirts off the wire hangers, and stuffed them into the bag. "Logan?" Chloe asked, stepping toward him. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" "I'm leaving, Chloe," Logan said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "My father's lawyers just served me with a copy of the paperwork. My dad officially filed a fraud dispute with the bank regarding the $65,000 in wedding charges. He is claiming that you and your mother used my emergency card without authorization, promising a reimbursement check from an account that was already closed. But that is a lie," Chloe cried. "You were there. You signed the contracts. You handed the card to Jillian." "It does not matter, Chloe," Logan said, zipping the bag with a sharp metallic slide. "My father has the resources to tie this up in court for years, and this afternoon, the country club caterer and the florist filed a joint civil lawsuit in the Connecticut Superior Court. They are suing us for breach of contract, demanding the full $120,000 balance of the original wedding contracts plus legal fees. We are listed as co-defendants, you, me, and your mother." Logan picked up his duffel bag and walked toward the door. "My dad called me an hour ago. He offered me a deal. If I pack my bags, move back into my childhood bedroom, and cut all contact with you and your family, he will hire a defense attorney to represent me in the lawsuit. He will help me clear my name, but I have to leave you. Immediately." "Logan, no!" Chloe screamed, grabbing his arm. "You cannot leave me. We love each other. We are supposed to get married in 2 weeks." Logan turned to face her, pulling his arm away from her grip. His eyes were cold, filled with a deep, bitter resentment. "Marrying you was the worst mistake of my life, Chloe. Your family is a black hole of debt, lies, and vanity." You spent 15 years bleeding Clifton dry, and you thought you could do the same to me and my parents. You wanted a Vogue-worthy wedding, and now we are living in a Route 1 motel, facing felony investigations and $120,000 in lawsuits. I do not love you. I am terrified of you. Stay away from me. Logan pushed open the door of the motel room and stepped out into the cold rain. Chloe ran to the doorway, screaming his name into the dark parking lot. But the only response was the sound of Logan's Honda Civic engine starting, backing out of the space and speeding away. Chloe fell to her knees on the dirty carpet of the doorway, weeping hysterically, her hands clutching her head. Eleanor sat on the edge of the saggy mattress, staring at the blank wall, completely silent. The dream of the luxury vineyard wedding, the influencer photos, the Maldives honeymoon, and the high society life in Greenwich had vanished. All that remained was a cheap, freezing motel room, a mountain of legal summonses, a father in jail, and a pile of black trash bags sitting in a dark storage unit. The audit was complete and the liability was theirs alone. The mornings in Tuscany were cold and crisp, the valley covered in a thick layer of white mist that slowly burned away as the sun rose. I sat on my terrace, wearing a warm woolen sweater, eating fresh figs and warm bread Sophia had left for me. My laptop was open on the wooden table, connected to a secure video link with Lawrence Drake. Lawrence was sitting in his high-back leather chair in his Manhattan office, looking as sharp and unbothered as always. He took a sip of his coffee and opened the file folder on his desk. "Well, Clifton, the gears of justice are turning exactly as we anticipated," Lawrence said, a thin smile appearing on his face. "Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Geller, officially filed a divorce action in the Stamford Superior Court yesterday. He is serving me as your representative." "What are they asking for?" I asked, looking at the screen. "The usual laundry list," Lawrence chuckled. "They are demanding an emergency injunction to halt the transfer of the Greenwich house, which is useless since the title was registered to Holt's holding company last week. They are also demanding emergency spousal support of $15,000 a month, full payment of Eleanor's legal fees, and they are filing a motion to invalidate the post-nuptial agreement on the grounds of emotional duress, lack of independent counsel, and financial abuse." I took a slow sip of my tea. Duress? She had 3 weeks to review that contract 5 years ago, and I paid $150,000 to save her from the Atlantic City lenders. She had ample consideration. "Precisely," Lawrence said, nodding. "Geller is a small-time lawyer. He thinks he can bully us into a settlement because he assumes you want to avoid a public trial and protect your reputation. He has no idea we have already filed a countersuit. More importantly, he has no idea what is on that digital recorder you retrieved from Richard Vance's pocket." "Is the recording admissible, Lawrence?" I asked. "Connecticut is a two-party consent state for telephone wiretapping, and oral conversations have strict privacy protections." "It is fully admissible in this context," Lawrence explained, his tone shifting to that of a seasoned litigator. "First, the recording device was placed within your own personal property, the Armani suit jacket which was lent to Richard Vance. Second, the conversation took place in a public hotel bar where there was no reasonable expectation of privacy. But most importantly, the audio contains direct, material evidence of a conspiracy to commit financial fraud against you. Under Connecticut law, the two-party consent rule has clear exceptions when the recording is used to document a criminal conspiracy or fraud." Lawrence pulled up a copy of our post-nuptial agreement on the shared screen, highlighting a specific section in yellow. "Look at Clause 4, Section B," Lawrence said. "We drafted this specifically for the gambling issue, but the language is broad. It states, if either spouse engages in any active conspiracy, deception, or fraudulent activity intended to liquidate, siphon, or transfer the premarital or sole assets of the other party to a third party, all claims to spousal support, alimony, and division of marital property are immediately and permanently forfeited." I looked at the highlighted text. I had forgotten how thoroughly Lawrence had insulated me 5 years ago. The audio recording has Eleanor explicitly stating that she plans to manipulate me into selling the Greenwich estate, downsizing to a condo, and siphoning the equity to buy Richard Vance a Ford F-250 truck and a cabin in Maine. "Exactly," Lawrence said. Eleanor is caught on tape, conspiring with her ex-husband to defraud you of the very asset she is currently suing to protect. When we play that audio in the courtroom, Geller's motion for emergency spousal support will be dead on arrival. The judge will enforce the postnuptial waiver instantly. Eleanor will be left with $0 in alimony, and she will be responsible for her own legal fees. What about Richard Vance? I asked. He is still in custody, Lawrence replied. The Stanford court denied his bail reduction motion yesterday because of the grand larceny charge and the risk of flight. His garage is locked, and the police have seized the forged title documents. He is looking at a minimum of 3 years in state prison. The deadbeat father is officially out of the picture. And Chloe and Logan? Logan's father has hired a corporate defense firm to represent his son, Lawrence said, shaking his head. They have filed a cross-claim against Chloe and Eleanor, claiming they fraudulently induced Logan into signing the florist and caterer contracts by representing that you had authorized the funds. The country club caterer has also filed a motion for summary judgment. Chloe is facing a massive civil judgment under her own name, and her credit is permanently ruined. The wedding is dead, and the wedding planners are suing for their fees. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the olive trees. The morning mist had cleared, leaving the Tuscan sky a brilliant, clean blue. The court date for the emergency support hearing is next Thursday, Clifton, Lawrence said. Do you want to attend, or do you want me to handle it under your power of attorney? I smiled, a cold, calm feeling washing over me. I will fly back, Lawrence. I spent 15 years being the silent partner in that household. I want to be in the front row to watch the audit close. The Stanford Superior courtroom was quiet, smelling of floor wax, varnished wood, and stale paper. I sat at the defense table next to Lawrence Drake, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored dark navy suit. I felt calm, my hands resting flat on the mahogany table. Across the aisle, Eleanor sat next to her lawyer, Mr. Geller. She looked a shadow of her former self. The expensive designer wardrobe that had defined her social standing in Greenwich was gone. She was wearing a simple off-brand navy dress she had likely purchased from a discount store. Her face was pale, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a cheap handbag. Mr. Geller sat next to her, looking disorganized, a messy pile of manila folders scattered across his table. At 10 a.m. sharp, the door behind the bench opened, and the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Evelyn Thorne, a stern, experienced woman with silver hair and a reputation for efficiency, took her seat at the bench. Stanford Superior Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Case number 23 CV 8890, Eleanor Barlow versus Clifton Barlow. Emergency motion for temporary spousal support and invalidation of postnuptial agreement. Judge Thorne adjusted her glasses and looked down at the documents. Mr. Geller, you may present your motion. Mr. Geller stood up, adjusting his polyester tie. He cleared his throat and began speaking in a dramatic, loud voice that felt completely out of place in the quiet room. Your Honor, Geller said, waving a hand toward Eleanor. My client, Eleanor Barlow, a devoted wife of 15 years, is the victim of extreme financial abuse, sudden abandonment, and calculated cruelty. Her husband, Clifton Barlow, a wealthy corporate executive, has systematically stripped her of her dignity and livelihood. On Monday of last week, without her knowledge or consent, Mr. Barlow sold their marital home in Greenwich, CT, to a corporate entity, pocketing the proceeds and moving them to an offshore account. He then closed their joint accounts, deactivated her credit cards, and left her and her daughter stranded in their bathrobes on the lawn. A murmur went through the few spectators in the gallery. Geller paused, looking pleased with himself. They are currently living in a cheap Route 1 motel, Geller continued, raising his voice. They have no assets, no income, and no credit. We are asking this court to issue an emergency order for temporary spousal support of $15,000 per month, full payment of our legal fees, and to declare the postnuptial agreement signed 5 years ago null and void. My client signed that contract under severe emotional duress, without independent legal counsel. While she was dealing with a mental health crisis involving gambling, Mr. Barlow used his financial leverage to force her to sign away her marital rights. Judge Thorne listened in silence, her expression unreadable. She turned her gaze to our table. Mr. Drake, your response? Lawrence Drake stood up calmly. He did not wave his hands, and he did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, authoritative confidence of a surgeon who knew exactly where to make the incision. Your Honor, the plaintiff's description of events is a complete misrepresentation of the facts, Lawrence said, placing a finger on the document folder. First, the Greenwich estate was a premarital asset purchased solely by Mr. Barlow years before the marriage. Second, the postnuptial agreement was signed with full notary public witness, and the consideration was a cash draft of $150. Zero used to clear Mrs. Barlow's personal debts. She had ample opportunity to secure independent counsel and declined to do so. But more importantly, Your Honor, Lawrence continued, leaning forward, we are asking the court to enforce Clause 4, Section B of the postnuptial agreement. This clause explicitly states that if either spouse engages in a conspiracy to defraud the other of their sole assets, all claims to spousal support, alimony, and division of property are permanently forfeited. Geller stood up, interrupting. Your Honor, this is a baseless accusation. There is no conspiracy. This is simply a corporate tactic to delay emergency relief for a woman who has been left destitute. We have material evidence of this conspiracy, Your Honor, Lawrence said, ignoring Geller's outburst. We have a digital audio recording captured on Sunday, November 12th, containing a conversation between Eleanor Barlow and her ex-husband, Richard Vance. In this recording, Mrs. Barlow explicitly details her plan to manipulate my client into selling the Greenwich estate, cashing out the equity, siphoning the funds to purchase a vehicle for her ex-husband, and force Mr. Barlow into a small condo so they can consume the remainder of his assets. Geller's mouth fell open. He looked at Eleanor, who had turned a pale, sickly green. She grabbed Geller's sleeve, whispering frantically in his ear. She had clearly never told her cheap lawyer about the conversation at the hotel bar. Your Honor, Geller stammered. This recording is hearsay. It was captured without consent. It is inadmissible under Connecticut wiretapping statutes. The recording was captured on a device legally placed within Mr. Barlow's own personal property, his suit jacket, which was lent to Richard Vance, Lawrence argued. The conversation took place in a public hotel lounge where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. And under Connecticut law, the two-party consent rule says a clear exception when the recording is used to prevent or document a fraudulent conspiracy against the owner of the property. Lawrence turned to the court officer. We have the audio file ready, Your Honor. We ask that it be played for the court as Exhibit A. Judge Thorne nodded to the court officer. You may play the recording. The officer clicked a button on his laptop, and the courtroom speakers crackled to life. The audio was clear, the high-fidelity recording capturing every detail of the busy hotel bar. First came the sound of clinking glasses, followed by Richard Vance's loud, smug voice. To the old ATM, may his cash flow never dry up. In the quiet courtroom, Eleanor's high, tinkling laugh echoed from the speakers. It sounded like breaking glass. Clifton always pays, Eleanor's recorded voice said, her tone dripping with the cold contempt she had hidden for 15 years. He has spent 15 years cleaning up our messes because he is terrified of conflict. He is an old Marine, but he is soft when it comes to family. He thinks if he writes enough checks, we will actually respect him. Honestly, he is useful. We just need to keep him happy until the wedding is over and the Maldives honeymoon is settled. After that, I am going to start working on him to sell the Greenwich estate. We can use the funds to get you that new Ford F-250 truck you wanted, Richard. And we can finally buy that cabin in Maine. Clifton can rot in a one-bedroom condo in Florida. He's 65. He doesn't need all this space. The audio played for another minute, detailing Logan's boasts about using my credit card and Richard's laughter. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every word of the digital confession. Eleanor buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. She could not look at the judge, she could not look at her lawyer, and she certainly could not look at me. Mr. Geller sat next to her, his jaw dropped, his eyes staring at the paper files in front of him. He was completely speechless. He had built his entire case on the narrative of a victimized, helpless wife, and his own client's voice had just demolished it in front of the judge. The recording stopped. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Thorne leaned forward, her face hardened into a mask of pure disgust. She looked down at Eleanor with complete disdain. "Mr. Geller," Judge Thorne said, her voice cold and cutting, "do you have any further arguments to present regarding the validity of the postnuptial agreement?" Geller stood up, his hands shaking as he held his notepad. Your Honor, she was drinking. It was a private, informal conversation. It does not represent a legal conspiracy. It was simply talk. It was a detailed blueprint for financial parasitism, Mr. Geller," Judge Thorne said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "This court has no tolerance for deception, and we certainly have no tolerance for spouses who view their partners as financial utilities to be drained and discarded." The judge picked up her pen and began writing on the order sheet. "The court finds the postnuptial agreement dated October 14, 2021 to be fully valid and enforceable," Judge Thorne ruled, her voice firm. "The contract was signed with proper notary witness, and the consideration of $150 to clear the plaintiff's gambling debts is fully documented. Furthermore, the court has reviewed the audio recording presented as Exhibit A. The plaintiff's own words demonstrate a clear, calculated conspiracy to defraud her husband of his sole premarital assets, specifically the Greenwich estate, which has since been legally sold." Judge Thorne looked directly at Eleanor. "Under Clause 4, Section B of the agreement, the plaintiff has violated the covenant of financial honesty. As a result, all claims to emergency spousal support, division of property, alimony, and the payment of legal fees are denied. The motion is dismissed with prejudice. Eleanor Barlow is solely responsible for her own legal representation costs." The judge slammed her gavel down with a sharp, heavy crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Court is adjourned." Judge Thorne stood up and walked out of the courtroom, the door slamming behind her. Eleanor slumped forward onto the mahogany table, crying hysterically, her cheap handbag falling to the floor. Mr. Geller slowly began packing his folders into his briefcase, refusing to look at his client. He knew he was never going to get paid. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and looked down at the woman who had spent 15 years planning my financial ruin. I did not feel angry. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I simply felt the deep, clean satisfaction of a completed audit. The books were balanced. The liability had been resolved and the balance sheet was clear. "Let us go, Clifton," Lawrence Drake said, closing his leather briefcase. "We have a flight to catch." "Yes," I said, turning my back on Eleanor Barlow for the final time. "We do." I walked out of the Stamford courthouse and down the wide limestone steps, the cool, crisp autumn air hitting my face. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were breaking to reveal a pale blue sky. With every step down the stairs, I felt the weight of 15 years of quiet exploitation lifting off my shoulders. I was no longer the silent provider, the ATM, the man who was too corporate to be photogenic. I was just Clifton Barlow, a free man. Lawrence Drake walked beside me, his leather briefcase in hand. "A clean sweep, Clifton. The judge's order is absolute. The postnuptial agreement stands, the sale of the house is final, and Eleanor Barlow is left with exactly $0 in spousal support. She is also on the hook for her own legal fees, which I expect Mr. Geller will try to collect from her remaining pocket cash." "What about the civil lawsuits from the wedding vendors?" I asked, looking toward the parking lot. "They are moving forward," Lawrence replied. "The country club caterer and the florist are pursuing Logan and Chloe as the sole signatories on the contracts. Since Logan's father co-signed the card used for the deposits, his lawyers are aggressively trying to shift the entire liability onto Chloe and Eleanor. They are claiming fraudulent inducement. Chloe is looking at a civil judgment that will follow her for the rest of her life. Her credit rating is permanently ruined." Lawrence paused, looking at me. During the recess, Geller mentioned that Eleanor and Chloe were planning to use Chloe's $200,000 trust fund to clear the credit card balance and settle the lawsuits. They believe the trust fund was scheduled to release to Chloe on her wedding day. "Are they going to try to challenge the trust?" I let out a dry, quiet laugh. They can try, Lawrence, but they have no legal standing. When I established that trust 10 years ago, I had the foresight to include a strict conditional clause in the terms of the trust agreement. What was the clause? Lawrence asked, interested. The clause stated, the trust funds shall be released in full to the beneficiary, Chloe Vance, on the day of her wedding, provided that her stepfather, Clifton Barlow, is formally acknowledged, respected, and honored as the host and the father of the bride during the ceremony and planning process. I looked at Lawrence. Chloe violated that condition the moment she uninvited me and listed her biological father, Richard Vance, as the host on the wedding invitation. She breached the terms of the trust before the wedding date even arrived. But more importantly, I continued, I logged into the account on Sunday night and exercised my right as the sole grantor of the trust. I changed the beneficiary. The $200,000 has already been transferred in full to the Wounded Warrior Project. The transaction was finalized on Monday morning at 9 a.m. The money is gone, Lawrence. It belongs to the veterans now. Lawrence smiled, a rare expression of genuine satisfaction on his face. Poetic justice, Clifton. A perfect audit. They tried to strip you for parts, and you left them with nothing but the bill. Yes, I said. Let us head to the airport. While I was driving toward JFK to catch my return flight to Italy, Eleanor was sitting on the saggy bed in the Route 1 motel room. She had just returned from the courthouse, her body shivering, her face pale. Mr. Geller had dropped her as a client the moment they walked out of the courtroom, demanding $2,000 in cash for filing fees and consulting hours. Chloe was waiting in the room, pacing the floor, her phone in her hand. Mom, what did the judge say? Did we get the spousal support? Did we get the house equity? Eleanor looked at her daughter, her eyes vacant and filled with tears. No, Chloe. The judge ruled the post-nuptial agreement is valid. Clifton played a recording of me and Richard at the hotel bar. The judge, she heard everything we said about cashing out the house and putting him in a condo. What? Chloe gasped, her face turning pale. A recording? How? Where did he get a recording? The suit jacket, Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. Clifton put a recorder in the Armani suit he lent to Richard. The judge said we conspired to defraud him. We get nothing. No alimony, no spousal support. I have to pay Geller, and we have to vacate the storage unit next week because I cannot pay the monthly fee. Chloe dropped her phone onto the carpet. But what about the trust fund? The $200,000 trust fund Clifton set up for me? The bank said it was scheduled to release on my wedding day. We can use that to pay Logan's father and settle the caterer's lawsuit. We still have the trust. Eleanor shook her head, tears running down her cheeks. I called the trust department at the bank after we left the court, Chloe. They said Clifton Barlow logged into the account on Sunday night and changed the beneficiary. The money was donated in full to a veterans charity on Monday morning. The account has a balance of $0. Chloe stood frozen in the middle of the cheap motel room. She looked at the peeling floral wallpaper, the saggy mattress, and the black trash bags stacked in the corner. The realization that the $200, zeros in safety net was gone, that Logan was gone, that her father was in jail, and that she was facing bankruptcy and a massive lawsuit at 26 years old finally broke her. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream, grabbing a plastic ice bucket from the dresser and throwing it against the wall. She fell to the floor, clawing at the cheap carpet, sobbing uncontrollably. Eleanor sat in the corner, her face buried in her hands, listening to her daughter's screams. The stage they had built for my exit had turned into their own execution chamber. They had wanted the real father, and they had wanted the aesthetic. Now they had both. 2 months have passed since the courtroom doors slammed shut in Stamford, Connecticut. I am sitting on the terrace of my Tuscan villa, watching the sun sink slowly below the hills, painting the sky in deep shades of terracotta, gold, and bruised violet. The air is cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and ripening olives from the trees below. Sophia, the property manager, recently brought me a plate of local pecorino cheese and fresh figs. I take a slow sip of my Brunello di Montalcino, enjoying the absolute undisturbed quiet. On the table next to my wineglass lies a letter from the director of the Wounded Warrior Project. It is a formal letter of appreciation, thanking me for the $200,000 donation to support veterans adjusting to civilian life. I keep it on my mahogany desk in the study as a reminder of where my hard-earned money belongs. Yesterday, I received the final audit report from Lawrence Drake. He sent a detailed summary of the fallout back in Connecticut, and the numbers are exactly as I calculated. Eleanor Barlow is no longer a resident of Greenwich. She is currently renting a cramped, drafty, one-bedroom apartment in a rundown section of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Her days are spent working as a retail clerk at a discount home goods store, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day for minimum wage. The wealthy socialites from her garden club and the country club have completely blocked her number. In the end, high society has no room for an evicted woman with a ruined credit history and a public divorce record. She is learning the true value of a dollar the hard way, without my bank account to cushion the landing. Chloe Vance's social media influencer career is officially dead. Her Instagram and TikTok accounts have been deactivated after her comments sections were flooded with mockery about her Vogue-worthy eviction. She filed for personal Chapter 7 bankruptcy to escape the $120,000 in civil judgments from the florist and the country club caterer. However, Donald's lawyers successfully blocked the discharge of the $65,000 credit card debt, arguing that she committed fraud. Chloe is currently working as a receptionist at a local used car dealership, using her phone to answer customer inquiries rather than taking selfies. The influencer shine has completely washed away, replaced by the dull reality of a 40-hour workweek. Richard Vance pleaded guilty to Class C felony forgery and grand larceny. The evidence was too overwhelming for a defense, and the Stamford court sentenced him to 3 years at the Osborne Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut. The charcoal Armani suit he stole from my closet was returned to Lawrence Drake by the police department. Lawrence, under my instructions, donated the suit to a charity that helps homeless veterans secure clothing for job interviews. The suit is finally being worn by men who deserve respect. Logan is living in his parents' basement in New Jersey, his credit rating completely destroyed at 27 years old. He is working a low-level data entry job, his relationship with his father, Donald, permanently fractured. He will spend the next decade paying off the debts he accumulated in 48 hours of arrogant spending. I set my glass of wine down and look out at the dark valley below. The lights of the distant village are starting to flicker on, like tiny gold stars in the darkness. For 15 years, I believed that loyalty was something you could secure with a balance sheet. I thought that if I paid the bills, cleared the debts, and funded the luxury, I would be respected as a father and a husband. I was wrong. Entitlement is a bottomless pit. The more you pour into it, the larger it grows until it finally consumes the provider. They wanted me out of their picture-perfect life because they believed I was just the stiff, corporate background. They forgot that I was the one who bought the camera, financed the lighting, and paid for the stage. When they threw me out of the theater, I simply took the theater down. My name is Clifton Barlow. I am 65 years old. I am a retired chief financial officer, a former Marine, and a free man. The audit is finalized. The accounts are closed. The balance sheet of my life is finally beautifully balanced. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that respect is non-negotiable and that betrayal always comes with a cost, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, and never let anyone treat you like an ATM. Goodbye from Tuscany.